Okay, let's get started. We have some exciting technology to cover today. So, what do we want to do? We want to improve our performance so that all these people who are like naysayers about blockchain technology will remain, we will be able to shut them up, right? So we want to get to these levels where we can support 10,000 transactions per second or so. And our starting position was, well, we're starting from a very sad base of like 3 transactions per second or so. One could tweak parameters. I'm being generous here. I think you can go by 1 order of magnitude by making little block size manipulation. And maybe if you were to go to a better design for the overall consensus protocol, you can get maybe a bit more. But to really reach this, you need something extra. You need some extra oomph. And I think other people alluded to this, but I'm told that nobody really went into any depth. I personally didn't see anybody talk about payment channels. Did anyone talk about payment channels at the winter school? Great. So I want to talk to you about off-chain technology. That is, by taking some transactions off the chain entirely, but carrying them out in a mostly trustless fashion, we might be able to get many orders of magnitude improvement in what we are able to support. And so I want to show you the 2 techniques. I want to show you the main technique that is not due to me, which is software implemented payment channels. And then I want to also show you how we plan to use hardware help to get an additional improvement in performance and also much better security. So let me, without further ado, let's start delving into this. So we have our actors, Alice and Bob, and they want to exchange some value between the 2 of them. And now it's going to be imperative for at least this discussion that Alice and Bob have frequent interactions, okay? So in the case where Alice and Bob just met and will never meet again, then there is really nothing they can do except go on the chain, and then they're limited by whatever the chain's inherent capacity is. But if Alice and Bob have some kind of a long-term, long-running relationship, they pay each other. I don't know, so I'm just going to put on the hat of a Lightning Network proponent. Some kind of a long-standing relationship where I pay you and you pay me back and I pay you and so forth. Then what one could do is one could use the chain as a settlement layer only and keep track of balances off the chain. How does that work? It works approximately like this. So one could create what is called a payment channel by prior agreement between 2 parties who have some funds on the main chain. These 2 parties, Alice and Bob, will go through a protocol that has 3 phases. It's going to have a setup phase, an exchange phase, and a settlement phase. And in essence, what's going to happen is something kind of like this. Alice is going to say something like, I have some money on the chain. I have $100. And what I would like to do is I would like to reserve these $100 for payments with Bob. I promise, and this promise has to be done on the chain. So she has to reserve this money. She has to put it into a particular state where she herself cannot spend this money without Bob's consent. So she, in essence, says, I am rendering my funds on this chain immovable. They are now dedicated to Bob. And Bob can end up doing something similar as well. It's going to complicate the matters. Let's just assume at the moment that Bob has no money, that this relationship starts with Alice having reserved $100, with Bob having 0. Once Alice does this setup, and once these 2 mutually understand and do their setup phase of the protocol, then what we have is $100 on the chain that are now tied up. Alice herself cannot make them mobile again. Okay? To render those funds movable again, Alice will need a 2 out of 2 multi-sig transaction. She's going to need Bob's consent to make these funds movable again. So if all we did was set the transaction up, set the payment channel up, and immediately tear it down, it would look like Alice says she moves her funds from wherever they are into a 2 out of 2 multi-sig transaction, and then the teardown would look like Bob and Alice together agree to make these funds movable again and give them back to Alice. Okay? So far, so good. But in between those two operations, we could start to do cool things. So once Alice moves the funds into the payment channel, okay, so the setup transaction I'm going to refer to as the creation of the payment channel. Once the funds are in the payment channel, Alice and Bob in private have a balance between them. Alice has $100, Bob has 0. And what the two of them could do in private is they could start paying each other without having to coordinate with anybody on the chain, without having to make a single mark on the chain. This is pretty powerful. So in our case, for example, Alice could pay Bob $90. And the only person who's notified is Bob. And the only thing that happens is they mentally change the balance of payments. Essentially, instead of having $100 for Alice and 0 for Bob, after this payment, they just say, look, we mutually agree that I now have $10 and you have $90. So far, so good? And we had to spend 0 bandwidth on the main chain. We had to do absolutely nothing on the main chain to facilitate this payment. Now imagine, I don't know what kind of a relationship this is. I have a lot of reservations about payment channels, so we'll get to them at the very end of the talk. But with my payment channels proponent hat on, okay, it's one of these relationships where people pay back and forth. Usually my employer pays me, and I never pay back Cornell, and then it's just one-way stuff. But in this world, okay, so this is a strange relationship where people pay back and forth. But anyway, it's one of those relationships. So Alice had $100, Bob had 0. Alice pays Bob 90, so it's 1090. And then Bob does 2 payments in the opposite direction. Now the balance has shifted to $20 for Alice and 80 for Bob. So far, so good. We did 3 payments, but we only had to do just 1 setup transaction on the main network. Is everyone with me so far? Okay. So, and then at this point, let's suppose that Bob wants to go and spend his newfound money with some other merchant. So what he could do is he could say, okay, this is good. I would like to now settle. And he pushes a settlement transaction, a 2 out of 2 multi-sig, that says, this money, remember this money that Alice had? We're going to now make it mobile, except this transaction is going to now turn into this other transaction that takes these funds and spends them in the following split. 20 of those dollars goes to Alice, and 80 of those dollars goes to Bob. And the amazing thing is, Alice and Bob could have done like 1,000,000 transactions between the two of them. And they would never have had to hit the blockchain. So if these guys were, I don't know, gamblers betting like little things, they could go bazillions of times back and forth. At the end of the day, they have a balance, and they push the balance back. So this is going to be the general form of a payment channel. There is a setup phase where the funds are rendered immobile, and in the minds of the participants, there is a balance that's established. Then there is the payments phase, where there's a lot of money that goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then there is finally a settlement phase, where people say, okay, well, this is all fine and dandy. Let's update the blockchain with the new balances, and we update the blockchain with the new balances. Once that update is done, it's as if all these transactions took place on the main chain, but they didn't. Okay, so all we're doing is we're netting their final effects. Nobody gets to see these transactions. There is an element of privacy that we added, right? So everything that happened within the payment channel is private to these two parties. The only thing that we place back on the blockchain is this final result. So far, so good? Yeah?
Do you see mutable trust between Alice and Bob if they do not agree on the current balance? So what's happening?
There is all sorts of issues to worry about. Very good question. So this protocol, for which I don't know if I have slides for it. Let me see just a second. So that protocol should be trustless. We don't want Bob in a position to cheat Alice. And maybe it's time to talk about that. I don't know what I have a slide for. I think go back. I'm not sure what I was trying to show here. Let's just go back to this. So the main system in which this idea was explored is called the Lightning Network. It is the main method by which the Bitcoin Core proponents want to scale Bitcoin. And the Lightning Network is probably the sort of the purest form of this effort, and is probably the best implemented one. So Lightning Network is implemented entirely in software. And there is one main method by which Bob could cheat Alice. So for me to explain what it is, we need to go one click below to how these payments are made. Okay? So let's explore that. So how should they be made? Well, it turns out it's actually fairly straightforward. When the channel is set up on the main chain, we are essentially doing a payment out of some funds that Alice has into a 2 out of 2 multi-sig address. Okay? So an address controlled by both Alice and Bob. It requires consent from both parties. And in that address, or with that address, so what does it mean to pay into it? Essentially, Alice pays in to a transaction. She creates a settlement transaction, in essence, that says, Alice says she has $100 and Bob has 0. And it's signed by both Alice and Bob. So that transaction acts as a settlement transaction. At any one time, either of them could just push it onto the main chain, and then suddenly the payment channel collapses. The money that Alice reserved goes back to Alice and Bob. So far, so okay. Now, the payment from Alice to Bob is, in essence, an updated settlement transaction. Every time either party pays the other one, what they do is they change the settlement transaction. I say something like, look, it used to be 100 for me and 0 for you. That was the settlement transaction. I am now signing a different check that allows us to resolve this matter with 90 for you and 10 for me. Okay, so that's this $90 payment. So now, Bob used to have a little check in his hand that would give 100 back to Alice and 0 to himself. Now he has a different check in his hand that says he gets 90 and Alice gets 0. Alice gets 10. So far, so okay? And then when Bob does a $5 payment, what he's doing is he's signing a 2 out of 2 multi-sig, and he's essentially saying the settlement can now be $15 for her and $85 for me. And then when he pays another 5, now they have another settlement transaction that says 20 for Alice and 80 for Bob. What is the big security flaw with this?
One of them can stop the other from spending the settlement?
It's hard to stop anybody because they both have communication. They have access to the blockchain. So at any one time, oh, you mean like by DOSing and so forth? Oh, yeah, that's a concern. Yeah, so you need access to the blockchain for sure.
They have a better state. If they have a better state that they profit more from, they can.
Exactly. So take the case of Alice. Okay, when everything started, she had a settlement transaction in her hand that said, "I have $100 and Bob has 0." And then she did a payment, and a lot of money went to Bob. And then, Bob paid her her back. The most recent settlement transaction clearly says she's got 20, Bob's got 80. But Alice is under no obligation to settle with the most recent settlement transaction. She could be evil, and she could use a stale transaction to settle with an early state. So that's really the big problem in payment channels. And so we're going to have to fix that problem. That turns out to be the most important issue. You had some questions?
I had a comment. This is the way banks exchange checks with each other. If you pay somebody else's check in my bank, I just put it into a compensation chamber in the middle. But that requires somebody in the middle that it's a trusted or managing all the transactions, and just moves the balance at the end of the day from one bank to the other.
Are you Israeli or where are you from?
Mexican.
Okay. So I'm Turkish. This is exactly how all Turkish commerce works. So the fees that the banks extract in Turkey are very high. So what people do is they will write each other's, they will update each other's checks. So Luba will give me a check, and then I will assign that check to you, and so on and so forth. And there will be a whole bunch of settlement checks, and it's only at the end of a week or so that we go to the bank and settle it all out. So yeah, it's kind of funny. Like the moment I heard this, I was like, yeah, that's what happens. but to the crypto world, this was kind of new, and so they Joseph Poon and Taj Driya worked it all out. So this is going to be the crypto version of it. It's going to be mostly trustless. Yes.
So you said that you're not a big proponent of payment channels.
Mm-hmm.
First,
But for the purposes of this conversation, I have this hat on that you can't see, and I'm trying to channel other people.
okay, so my question is, one-way payment channels, they're just like scheduled payments.
Yeah.
Are much easier to analyze and don't have all these complicated failure states.
Sure.
Failure modes.
Maybe.
Do you see in that, or is
No, I don't know if the one-wayness helps at all. Let's talk about the problems of payment channels at the end. So there's no way that's going to escape me. Don't worry. So we'll bring out the criticisms. But yes, Sergey, right? Yeah.
When Alice sent a transaction, he signed this transaction.
Yes.
But
But hang on. When Alice makes a payment, she is signing a new settlement transaction. For that settlement transaction to be valid, both parties have to sign it. So the act of creating a payment in the Lightning Network requires asymmetric cryptography from two parties. So Alice has to sign her part. She has to do an ECDSA signature. And Bob has to sign his part. So that's two asymmetric signatures for creating this new Bitcoin transaction.
can Alice just create multi-sig transaction, doesn't sign it, send it to Bob, and if Bob sign it, then Alice signed it.
So sometimes there are those sequencing issues. What's the problem with Alice? Yeah, so can I just assume for now that there's atomicity in signing of that particular settlement transaction? Let me just assume that. So I would have to think carefully about how the sequencing has to be done. There probably is some sequencing that needs to be done. But let's talk a little bit about the main issue at hand, which is a settlement with a stale state. Yes?
This happens because any one person can write the settlement to the blockchain. It doesn't have to be sent by both of them.
Exactly. This happens because any party can write unilaterally to the blockchain. It happens because both parties have access to all past states. And in each past state, they had a legitimate settlement transaction.
Why wouldn't you make the transaction on the blockchain need to be signed by both? For it to be,
It needs to be signed by both.
it's signed by both on the payment channel, but I mean another, like an agreement by Alice and by Bob that this current settlement is valid according to their
You want to introduce another
signature.
but you realize that would break the whole thing, because Alice would pay Bob $90, and it seems like she's paying Bob, but if she doesn't later participate in that second protocol you want to introduce,
You can do that anyway by just using her original.
well, so I don't know how to fix things when the proposed second phase breaks down. If Alice doesn't participate in this, it's going to go to hell, right? So it's just like, oh, I thought I was paid, but now she's not coming through, and I'm screwed. Whereas I'm going to show you a trick. Huh?
But her money is tied up as well, so she doesn't have it either.
Yeah, but you know, maybe it was a case where Alice just paid all 100 to this side. So now you want her to remain engaged. So I don't know how to make that idea work. If you could make it work, that'd be pretty cool. But I will show you how the Lightning folks want to make this particular idea work. This they can make work using a particular trick that I'm about to explain. So everybody's on the same page. You see that people are capable of pushing a bad state. So what's there to do? So in fact, maybe this is exactly the next slide. Where's my slide? Okay. So people suggested two fixes to this settlement issue. Okay, so there aren't that many different ways of of resolving this problem. So what you want to do is ensure that this crazy Luba closes the channel with a very, very early state kind of a problem go away. That's what we want to go away. And so there were two papers that are really interesting. This one is probably the most understandable of all of the payment channel papers from 2015. It's fairly old, by Decker and Wattenhofer. This is the duplex micropayment channels paper. And the Lightning Network uses a different scheme. So the two schemes are as follows. So one thing we could do is when we create the payment channel, we create a settlement transaction, say, for a month from now. Okay? So when Alice is creating this payment, where are we? Yeah, here. When Alice is creating this channel, she creates a settlement transaction that's good on the, what's the date today, 19th? On the 19th of January 2019. Okay? Are we good? So when she does a payment, she creates an updated settlement transaction that's good on January 18, 2019. And when Bob pays back, that new transaction is good on January 17, and so on and so forth. So yes, you have a bunch of stale states. Yes, you could use them to close the channel, but they're not valid until later in time. So if Alice wanted to be a jerk and she wanted to close the channel with the very early state, she would have to wait until January 19. And in the meantime, Bob has all the time in the world, we would hope, where he could close the channel on January 16 or whatever with the most updated state. Is that clear? Okay, okay, good. So that's the Decker and Wattenhofer idea. It's pretty nice. So it does mean that every channel has a finite time. Okay, so that's a bit of a problem, right? So you and I got into a payment channel. I tied up all my coins in it for whatever, 3 months, and now Bitcoin price is doing crazy things, and I will find it a little hard to get out of this payment channel. So that's a problem with these time locks. And every channel has a finite lifetime. So we created something, and as we transact back and forth, we are consuming consuming the time in essence. Now, of course, the actual time that we use is going to be block height. So it's not really time, but it's essentially the same thing. So that's that idea. Is everyone with me on this? Okay. Now, the Lightning Network uses a different trick, and it uses punishment. So how does that work? It's different. It's a slightly different trick than here. So what they use is as follows. So and this is a cute trick, and I don't have a slide for this, but the trick is as follows. So the settlement transaction is written in a very funny fashion. Okay. So a simple settlement transaction would simply say, look, this money that used to be here, it goes to I don't know, it goes to Bob, 90 of it goes to Bob, 10 of it goes to Alice. Okay? That's what it would normally say. But that's not how they write it. So they write it as follows. The settlement transaction says, the money that was here, it can go in one of two ways. Okay? The normal way is that 90 of it goes to Bob and 10 of it goes to Alice. But if somebody knows the preimage of the following hash, if they can give you a number that when hashed yields the following result, then that person gets to take all the money in the channel. Okay? So that's a funny kind of a trapdoor kind of a thing that they create. So in essence, I'm saying, look, we're going to be able to settle this channel. The channel is going to settle into, the way it's supposed to settle, 90-10. But if you happen to know this additional thing, okay, if you happen to know this magic number, then you get to keep all the money in the channel. So this is a weird trapdoor. Why do they put that trapdoor? Because now they do this additional thing. When Alice pays Bob, she reveals the preimage of the hash with every transaction. The previous image, yeah. So in essence, so here's how this would work. So Alice creates this channel, and she's going to now pay our guy Bob. Okay, and so they create a transaction. How does this work? They create a transaction that says Bob gets 90, Alice gets 10. Now remember, Alice is in possession of another settlement transaction that allows her to close the channel with all $100 in her own name. Okay? So that's bad for Bob. Bob is the recipient of the money. And so if Bob sees that on the blockchain, he will want to claw the funds back. Okay? And similarly, Alice is giving all this stuff. Okay, so let's actually, I skipped a step. So let's do it with the $90. Okay, so Alice is writing a settlement transaction that says 90 goes to Bob, 10 goes to Alice. But if anybody knows the number whose hash is dead beef, okay, then they get to keep all the funds, and so that's fine. And when Bob does a payment in the other direction, one of the parties, I think Alice, needs to reveal to Bob the pre-image of dead beef. Okay? The pre-image, the previous hash, the number.
The image that corresponds to the previous transaction.
Exactly, the nonce whose hash yields the value encoded in the previous transaction. So now, if the other party tries to use the old state, you are able to go and claw the funds back. Did that make sense? Okay.
But then you can claw all the funds back even without him revealing.
No, because at any one time, so we will have gone into, like, you and I had like some k number of exchanges, right? We went back and forth k times. We all know k minus 1 of those states.
Yeah, but we said the first settlement transaction is Alice gets 100 unless Bob knows the pre-image.
Which he doesn't.
Which he doesn't.
Right.
And then we create a new state, and at this time Alice reveals the pre-image. So now can't Bob, get the 100 from the first state?
No. Only if Alice pushes the first state.
So as far as I remember, Alice reveals the pre-image when she pushes the first state. Otherwise,
no, Alice and Bob are both together in possession of their components of this secret. Okay, so when Alice makes a payment and a new settlement transaction is formed, then both parties are in possession of that nonce for the old state.
Okay.
That's the invariant. So what's going to happen is, if Alice pushes that old state onto the chain, then Bob is able to claw back the funds. But Alice is no dummy. She wouldn't do that. And if she doesn't do that, then the only recourse they have is for Bob to push the most recent state. Okay. So I think I expressed the invariance properly on that one. Yeah.
What if she pushes the old state and put her money from her account?
Very good question. So we have to give some time to Bob to go and contest the settlement. So all of the Lightning transactions are time locked after they've been settled onto the chain. I don't know if that makes sense. So for this scheme to work, you need two additional features that I alluded to but didn't explicitly mention, so let's name them. We need space on the blockchain to be able to settle, right? So,
So both require a timer.
both ways will end up requiring a timer. Sorry, two things. There needs to be space for me to push the clawback transaction. If the blockchain is inundated with stuff, people are spamming it or whatever, or it's too expensive for me to claw back the money, then I won't bother. Right? That's problem one. Problem two, or issue number two, is I have to know that Alice closed the channel with an early state. I have to be diligently watching the blockchain. So if I have a payment channel with you, I really have to be looking at the blockchain at all times to see if you're doing this trick to me. And if you are, then I have to push my clawback transaction. So in the Lightning design, to be able to do this, they expect that regular users won't be online 7/24. So they have this notion of watchtowers, is it? Or watchguards? Watchtowers. Yeah, they have this notion of watchtowers that watch the chain and will push the transaction, the clawback transaction, on your behalf if your counterparty misbehaves with you. So these are a whole bunch of very fragile set of assumptions. So suddenly we started out with what I thought was already complex, Nakamoto consensus, and now we're adding additional security features onto it. Now we have to have a watchtower. How do you pay the watchtower? How do you incentivize the watchtower? That's a problem. So that, and also you have to make sure that the chain is not completely flooded. And but if you keep the block size small to force people into lightning channels, then there might very well be not enough space on the main chain. Yes.
Why do you actually need the punishment? Why wouldn't it be enough to say that if one of the parties pushes a newer state, a newer settlement check, then that's the one that's validated?
I don't really know. You're right? So you could simply say, if it's old, then it settles, but you don't know how it should settle in that case.
But what is
Well,
old?
I mean, you have a settlement,
You have a settlement.
and it has a newer timestamp, and everything's signed by both parties, so you can just say, well, this Alice said this is the settlement, but here I have a newer settlement.
Because at the time that you create that thing, you have to know it has to be encoded in that transaction what the new state is. And you just,
Well, we do have to. You said
No.
isn't each settlement based on previous ones?
sorry, you have to know what the newest state is. You have the newer state. So it was 100, 0,
Yeah,
right? And so now we have an updated transaction, 1090.
which is timestamp.
That's great. So but then we can go back and forth a gazillion times, and I could still try to close with 100, 0. And so
And I could place the newer settlement and say this is the newer one. And if you have a newer one that's better for you, you can place it and I'll put in. I mean, eventually you'll have to reach an equilibrium where the latest settlement check will be the one that's been.
be careful though. So the newer settlement from 100, 0 was whatever it is, 0, 090 or 1090 or whatever. That's not the newest state.
It's not, but
But it might not be most favorable. Both of those states might be favorable to me.
But
Somebody
but
can spend
if
it.
it's favorable, to me, I will want to put my most favorable
Yes.
state. And
So
you'll want to put your most favorable state.
yes.
So whoever has the newest one, the newest most
May I
favorable.
clarify?
Yeah.
I think I get the issue. The transactions are not chained one onto another. They are spending the same two UTXOs from the multi-state. That's why when we have two conflicting states, there is no reliable way to tell which is new, which is older.
No,
We can
but,
put whatever
but
timestamps we want.
just like with the punishment, I'm saying use the same thing as the punishment method, but instead of having it as a punishment, just use that to sign the newest.
I don't know which one is the newest.
So yes, go ahead. Yes. Yeah.
The only way to do that is to push the entire chain and then
Yeah.
better with the side chain. That's the only way.
Only if two parties are trying to cheat each other.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
And-
we wouldn't.
But then you
You
waste
also want to
Yeah, the cost would actually be prohibitively large, right? If you end up having to push the whole chain state, then the money that you might have to spend thousands of dollars. You wouldn't be able to contest small thefts.
And you also
So-
need to preserve the state, which is really hard. People lose state.
People lose state.
No,
Yeah.
but I mean, it grows and grows. If we do a gazillion transactions,
Yeah.
all these stores.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
The mechanism is whenever I create a new state, then I reveal the previous.
Yep.
Right? So what's stopping Rob from settling the previous the state that was already revealed, and then showing the preimage that he already knows because Alice showed.
Sorry. So what's stopping Bob? That's a good attack, which is pretend that Alice pushed the old state and claw the money back.
Well,
Is that what you're suggesting?
yeah.
Yeah.
You can show it.
So I don't know off the top of my head because I'm not a lightning expert. But that should not be possible. I know for a fact it's not possible. But I don't know the trick off the top of my head that they use. I believe that what he knows is capable of only, he doesn't have, he should not be in possession of anything that would allow him to pretend to be Alice and do that. So
It's not the same preimage.
it's
The preimage says, if I am Bob and I have this have this pre-image. They're not symmetrical.
Yeah, I think that would fix it. Good, thank you, thank you.
But yeah, but that's what I mean. If Alice,
But Bob can impersonate Alice.
sure inside
You can go with it later.
So I'll take this offline. I think I'm trying to do I'm trying to do justice on the fly to Lightning Network. I don't know the exact details of the script off the top of my head, and so I thought this topic had been covered. So I'm trying to go into depth here that I wasn't quite prepared to do it. But that I think is possible to address, right? So what I really wanted to focus today on was something that everybody should have heard about at least once, which is, can we do better than all this crap, right? So we have all this stuff. Oh, there's something pretty important for all of these guys, which is, well, you're going to have to watch the chain to see if the other party is misbehaving. And if you're going to have to watch the chain for misbehavior, then, well, it can't be the case that the transactions are malleable. Are people aware of what this word means? Okay, malleability refers to the ability of the parties to change the transactions such that their hash is different, but their payment remains the same. So we will have a settlement transaction in our hands, and the settlement transaction pays out, and I will be watching the chain for it to see if you use any of the stale ones. If you make a subtle change to a padding field, for example, then suddenly the hash of the transaction will change, but the contents of the transaction won't change. And that's going to cause a lot of problems for my monitoring equipment, right? I want to just simply watch for hashes, and if you can mutate things on me, then that creates problems for me. So it is imperative for these things to be efficient that the transaction mechanism is non-malleable. And so Bitcoin was malleable for many, many years of its existence, and it had to be modified with this thing called SegWit to ensure that the signatures, the padding, the various different things you can play with inside the transaction's various fields are all non-malleable. Okay, so yes.
question related to malleable transaction. Is it just enough to have a canonical form for transaction in order to solve malleability issues?
It is enough. That's exactly how you solve it. So you have to have a canonical form for all padding. It has to be generated in the same deterministic fashion. The signature libraries that you use have to never ever put anything random into any field. The transactions themselves have to be in some canonical order.
All the dependencies you're using have to be deterministic and also canonical, right?
Yeah, you can, but it's harder than it seems, right? So in Bitcoin, there are maybe 6 different ways in which I could encode an integer. I could say 1 byte integer 0, 2 byte integer 00, right? You get the idea. And so there are a whole bunch of things that people can do of that kind that you need to rule out, which is what got done with SegWit, which required a hard fork. Actually, it did not require a hard fork, but it required a fork, a soft fork to embody. Yeah.
One of the big differences in Lightning Network is that it also allows to be a network, not only a payment channel. Just a question.
I did not go there yet.
Yeah, just not a field there, but just to understand, does with micropayment channels, do you have atomicity there as well?
Yes, absolutely. So these are essential. It's just the only thing that differs is this time-locked closing fashion. Both of these systems will create a network of participants. So alone, right? Alone is referring to this fact that once I have a channel with Luba that I could go very quickly over, and I have a channel with Morris, then I could start routing payments between the two of them without ever hitting the main chain. And in fact, then we would suddenly have an emergent network within this classroom of people who have payment channel relationships. And we could then send money between each other, again, without touching the main network. And that's what the Lightning Network is really trying to build. I don't know if I'll have time to go into that aspect of this stuff, but it applies equally to all of these approaches. So what I wanted to talk about today was this T-Chan approach, which is, okay, this is fine and that's fine. Both of them are just reasonable approaches, but it would be so much better from many different perspectives to take advantage of some trusted hardware to simplify the entire operation of this entire payment scheme. Now, what is that trusted hardware? Well, it's trusted hardware that you all happen to have in your most recent machines. If you buy an Intel chip, if you bought an Intel chip in the last year and a few months, then it comes with something called SGX. Okay, so these other chips also have various features. So ARM has something called trust zones. Ledger, these payment devices they have a secure component. AMD is working on something. The most advanced one is Intel's SGX, and it's quite an exciting ability. Did anybody talk about Intel SGX before at the winter school? Okay, not yet. Let me talk a little bit about what this ability is. So the way Intel ships their chips these days, the chips come with additional instructions and an additional mode. Okay, and in that additional mode, the chip is capable of doing the following. It's capable of taking some code you give it and running it inside the chip in a manner that is guaranteed to be free from molestation. What do I mean by that? Well, when I normally run some code, the chip allows that code to be stopped at any point. The chip allows a debugger to connect and change the internal registers of the hardware. The chip allows all sorts of funky things to happen while that code is executing. And when that code is executing, it is communicating with memory, and it's writing things to memory that are in clear text, right? When you say store 3 at this address, it stores the value 3 at that address. Okay? If you were to attach a USB stick onto your machine, or if you were to put probes into the system bus, you would see the value 3 moving to memory, coming back from memory, and so forth. With Intel SGX, none of that happens, okay? So what instead happens, at least mentally, is the chip has this notion of an enclave, a secure enclave, and it essentially takes the code that you might give it, and it executes that code inside the enclave in a special manner, where the entire communication between that code and memory is encrypted. So cache line by cache line, every cache line is encrypted for this enclave. That code, the basic blocks of code, the instructions, operates in a manner that cannot be stopped. And it operates in a manner where if stopped, or if the chip has to take an interrupt for whatever reason, the state of the chip is saved, it cannot be modified, and it can only be restored to what it used to be. So you can't connect with a debugger and arbitrarily change the internal state of the computation. So the goal here is to provide integrity and confidentiality guarantees to executing code. So that way, if you have some code running in an enclave, then I know that that code is going to only do those things that it's been programmed to do. I give you some number, you're supposed to, whatever, do something to it and give me back the result, the function result. That's all you can do. There is nothing else that could be done that the enclave could do. And there's one additional feature in addition to integrity and confidentiality that the Intel SGX provides, and this is kind of crucial. It's something that everybody should be familiar with. It's a primitive known as remote attestation. So in this case, how are we doing this? In one direction or another, we're doing it from Bob to Alice. If Bob has an Intel SGX device and he's running some code that is in the enclave, the chip is capable of generating a certificate that essentially says, I'm a secure chip. I was programmed in Portland, Oregon by Intel company, and I can prove this by providing a certificate that's signed by the Intel key that says that I'm a good chip. The chip itself has a secret key inside. Okay? I'm going to simplify this operation, but essentially what you're saying, you're going to create a certificate chain that says, Intel says this chip is a good chip. And then that chip says, using the secret key programmed into me at the Intel fab in Portland, I say that I'm running some code inside this enclave in an unmolestable fashion. And the hash of that code is Cafe Babe. Okay? So now suddenly I'm in a different universe. So before, when I was writing my distributed system, all I could do was send you messages and get messages back from you. And you could be arbitrarily Byzantine. I would have no idea what you're doing. I don't know what you're programmed to do. I send you a message, and I should be prepared for any message that might come back from you. But if you're running an enclave, and before we talk, I say something like, hey, are you running on an enclave? And if so, what's the hash of the code? And you provide to me one of these certificates. You say something like, I'm running on a chip, a genuine Intel chip. The genuine Intel chip tells me that I've got a code Cafe Babe. Now I know all of your behaviors. You can no longer be Byzantine. In essence, what we're doing is an amazing feature. We're taking off the table any possibility of Byzantine behaviors. All Byzantine behaviors now got replaced with fail-stop behaviors. You can turn off your chip at any time, and I have to be prepared for that. But you cannot concoct, you cannot make up a response that is not programmed in your code, right? So that's a pretty darn cool feature, and that's something that we're going to be using. So Bob, in this case, creates one of these certificates and says, hey, Alice, I am not like the other guys. I'm running SGX, and inside the enclave is the T-chan code, and therefore you can trust me that certain things will happen the proper way that they ought to happen. Yes?
What's the prospect for deploying this feature in smartphones?
It's very, very high. Everybody's working on it. The smartphones already have trust zones. So if you have an Android that's based on whatever it is, ARM, thank you. ARM has trust zones. So if you have an ARM phone, you already have a trust zone, but they don't implement remote attestation. So Intel SGX is the most advanced one when it comes to remote attestation. So it's a very nice feature. So if you think about computer security, right, how do I know that you're not going to misbehave? Right, suppose you're a router or whatever. The only way, until these techniques came along, the only way we actually achieved security was, I install a machine, I don't want him to misbehave, right next to him I put a monitor, right? And so that monitor's job is to make sure he doesn't misbehave. How do I make sure the monitor doesn't misbehave? I have to monitor him. And it never ended, right? It was turtles all the way down. But with SGX, I don't care, I don't need any of this stuff. I can just say, what code are you running? You tell me the hash, and that settles it for us. I know exactly all his behaviors for all time. So, were there questions or issues? Yeah, Nikos.
Something like that we cannot have Byzantine behavior, but only fail and up and down.
Exactly. So in general, so I don't want to make a statement that's too sweeping and potentially incorrect, but I believe that the following is true: that a properly constructed code base for your enclave, a properly constructed API for your enclave, and a proper attestation ensures that the only behaviors you ever have to deal with are crash faults. They are not Byzantine behaviors. So you of course have to, the API is important. The enclave should not. So here's maybe the better picture. Okay. In the SGX model, the enclave is protected, and the application code and system libraries outside the enclave, that is not part of you don't have to trust them. The operating system, you don't have to trust it. The drivers, the BIOS, you don't have to trust them. Oh, I should have mentioned this. The SGX hardware, I did mention it. It talks to memory. All of the cache lines are encrypted. So even if my counterparty goes and puts probes on his bus, he still won't be able to tamper with the internal state of the enclave computation. So those are very, very cool. But every entry, so if I'm talking to your enclave, I should set up a channel, a secure channel with it. Once I set up a secure channel to your enclave, then it's free from molestation. If I don't set up a secure channel, then there are attacks. These guys could actually start invoking invoking different entry points in your enclave at different times, and you could actually get messed up that way. So it's a bit subtle, and I'm happy to go into more depth on this maybe after I talk about T-Chan. Are there other questions or issues? Yeah.
It's kind of
Oh, that's a really big issue. So then Intel closes up shop, and they hang their heads in shame. We make fun of them, and it's actually absolutely horrendous. So Intel is a 50-something billion dollar company. This is a $10 billion research project for them, or at least R&D project for them. They have every incentive to not have that happen, but that is a problem. You're pointing out the fact that there is a single trusted party here, the manufacturer of the hardware. Absolutely. So, and in fact, we're going to leverage that party. That party is often very useful, but you are very much dependent on them. But I have to also mention, what if Intel puts something into their chip that, most of the time the chip works correctly. On occasion, when it's signing a high-value Bitcoin transaction, it pays to my account.
Yeah, but it's only, in this case, it's only the problem of particular people with particular accounts, but here the entire system depends on this.
Absolutely. If you're going to be using SGX, the right thing to do is to make sure that your system won't crash when SGX is compromised. So SGX has already been compromised once, so they did have a bug. Let's see. And so if you build a new currency where the entire premise of the currency goes away when SGX is a problem, you're in a world of hurt. Let's actually expand on that a little bit. You are worried about the case where there is a global violation at Intel headquarters. There are other cases where there is no global violation. The Intel key is not compromised, but Itai opens up his chip, essentially carves out the top of the chip, puts probes into his own silicon, and extracts his own key from his own chip. Now he has the ability to pretend that he's a secure enclave when he's not. So that's a compromise of a single chip. So if Intel is compromised, you're toast. If a single chip is compromised, you should not be toast. Okay, so in this design, what would happen is if your counterparty is compromised, then you lose money in that channel, but only in that channel. We don't get to inflate the money supply, for example. Bitcoin itself is not affected. Yes?
So don't you turn Intel into the main authority?
No.
The whole thing you're trying to avoid in a way?
No, you are relying on Intel as a trusted authority, but only for the purposes of our payment channel. They do not get to have control over Bitcoin itself. They do not get to mint coins that did not exist in the channel.
But they do become a monopoly, sort.
If Intel is the only person providing these services, then yes. But as I mentioned before, there are many others, right? So Luba and Morris would use like AMD for their own stuff, and you and I would use Intel. And there's this open risk thing coming out of Berkeley. So there are a bunch of different things we could do to spread that trust. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about how this stuff works. So we have Alice and Bob. Now we have Alice and Bob with trusted execution environments. So these enclaves create a trusted, or really the right word should be trustworthy execution environment. So inside, so they have these chips with secure areas, secure enclaves. Now what we're going to do is we're going to store the balances, our balances, inside these enclaves, and we will update each other's enclave. We will construct the enclaves so as to not give each other the ability to read stale states. So that's going to, by construction, rule out all of those attacks against the Lightning Network. So how does this work? Well, it works and starts out by Bob creating a private key in his own enclave, and Alice doing the same in her own enclave. And the very first thing that we do is move some funds into the enclave itself, right? So just like before, we have a setup transaction where the money is taken from here into a key that's controlled only by Alice's enclave. Where are we? Okay. So now we're going to do this this setup. Okay, I'm going to skip this stuff. Where are we? Okay, good. We've got these keys where Alice proves to the other side that she has a secure enclave. So her job is to say, look, Bob, I'm running T-Chan code. You can trust me. So the fingerprint says I'm running T-Chan. The encryption keys essentially creates the certificate chain all the way back up to Intel. And vice versa, Bob does the same thing, and they establish between the two of them a secure channel that's encrypted with a symmetric encryption key. So, okay, we're going to do it in the opposite direction. And so now this is the critical part. So both Alice and Bob, as I mentioned before, have their own keys inside their trusted execution environments. And they know that that the other party is running a trusted enclave, and they have their own secure communication channel that's symmetrically encrypted. So now nobody on Earth, including anybody who might have compromised Bob's machine and so forth, people listening in on the network, nobody can see the contents of these messages. Bob himself cannot see the contents of these messages. The only entity capable of decoding these messages is the enclave itself, and the enclave is only programmed to do those things that I'm about to explain that it does. So the next thing that happens is a message from Bob to Alice that says, hey, I am Bob. Here is the key, the all too important key that controls my funds. Here is the name of my funds, here is the amount, and here is a signature that certifies that everything I'm telling you is true. And
Bob's enclave.
I should be more precise. You're right. Bob's enclave sends this. Only Bob's enclave can send it. And this goes directly to Alice's enclave, the only entity capable of extracting any information from here. And she takes out this key. So from this moment on, both Bob and Alice have access to each other's private keys. This is kind of interesting. We could never have done this with software. We could never have done it with any other solution. So now this yellow key exists also on Alice's side. So Alice is now quite capable of signing as if she's Bob. That's kind of an interesting feature. So it happens in the opposite direction as well. And at the end of that, we have Alice's key inside Bob's enclave. Okay? So now, if for whatever reason we lose access to our counterparty, it doesn't affect us at all, because we could at any time go into our own enclave and use her private key. Now, of course, the trick is we have to craft the enclave so that the enclave will never allow us to sign a bad state. That's crucial. But now we suddenly got rid of a whole lot of attacks and a whole lot of concerns because we actually have access to our counterparty's most secret information. Yes?
What if you lose your phone?
What if you lose your phone? Then this channel would break down. And I skipped over some refund stuff. Okay, so there are two things you could do. The right thing to do, if you ask me. So when we made these slides, we were doing these refunds. The right thing to do is for Bob to have a stack of enclaves so that his state is copied into multiple enclaves. So he has a backup enclave. So if he loses his phone, he goes to the backup. And the backup has to be carefully crafted, though, because if he goes to his backup, the only thing he should be able to do is terminate with the most recent state. Yeah. You don't want Bob to fork himself into multiple Bobs. Yes, Zvi?
The enclave memory is encrypted, but not persistent, right?
It's not persistent, but the state, the enclave code will write its actual state onto storage.
So the private key will be encrypted and written to storage?
Yes.
Encrypted with what?
Encrypted with the storage key. So the SGX comes with a whole series of keys that it has persistently on it, so it can store things onto secondary storage that only the enclave can read back. Okay, so all right, I think yes. So the Intel key is compromised. So the Intel key is in a secure vault in Oregon. It is used solely to create the root of the certificate. The key that you care about is the main key inside the chip. If that's compromised, you're toast. But it's very hard to get at that thing, right? You really have to, shave off the top of this stuff. You have to go into 7 nanometer wire level. It will cost about $100 million, and there are about 5 to 10 people who can do it. So
but if the Intel key is compromised,
we're toast. Everything is toast. Absolutely.
So just a comment, I worked in semiconductor semiconductor industry and with Intel. So if they have something sensitive, they put it into a safe. You sign an NDA and they put in armed guard.
Yeah, undoubtedly. This is one of their most precious possessions. That key is the signing key, the root of the signing key is important. Just for, I don't want to spend too much time. The actual way in which they actually did this is they don't have the certificate chain stored statically on the chip at the moment. There is the service that you go to, and then you do this multiple interactions with an online Intel service. And that guy generates the certificate for you on the fly. That's an extra vulnerability. It's called the Intel attestation service. And they did it for business reasons. They came under a lot of fire for it. It's a bad idea because it's really vulnerable. The right way to do it would have been to sign it once at the factory, put the certificate here, and then walk away. They didn't do it. They now say that they're going to get rid of the Intel attestation service. So, okay. So I think I want to just sort of quickly go through this and give you a sense of what's happened. Everything that happens from this point on is exactly the same as before. Okay, so there are a bunch of these cases. Yeah, no, this doesn't really matter. Here is the important part. So the channel updates that in the previous world used to require two signatures, two asymmetric signatures, now happen with a symmetric update, right? So we have this payment channel, we have a particular key that it's encrypted, this communication channel is encrypted with. All that we have to do to make a payment is update the balances inside this enclave, send a simple message that's been symmetrically encrypted, and then Bob has to update his state. Bob never has access to any old refund transactions. Bob has to make a special call into his enclave to say, I want to close the channel. And that's when he gets to use these two keys. He gets to use them only once. And once that happens, he loses the contents of his enclave. So it's not like you can say, I want to close it. Oh, I changed my mind. I received a bunch of payments. I want to close it now, etc. You cannot get access to those old states. And that's the key thing that allows this thing to greatly simplify everything that's happening. So these are payments. So in this case, Alice says, hey, Bob, I'm giving you X amount of money. This is my message number 1. The messages cannot be replayed because of the sequence number, the monotonic counter that's going this way. They cannot be seen. They're encrypted to Bob's public key. Actually, they're not encrypted to Bob's public key. They're encrypted using symmetric encryption that was established based on Bob's public key. Okay, so we can go like this. This allows us to have incredibly fast updates. Yes, Alon.
You said that you persist the encrypted data. Did you do some kind of replay, like snapshot, and then replay in the older state to the SGX itself?
That's a crucial thing that should not be possible. SGX gives you these things called monotonic counters, so that you cannot do exactly that attack. Yeah, good call. Okay, so either party at any one time can say, I close the channel. Saying I closed is just essentially being nice to the other guy. She can only close with the latest state, and that's the only state that matters. There's really no contest period to worry about or anything else of the kind, because just by construction, those are all eliminated. So that's really a nice feature of this whole approach. And notice that Bob did not have to watch the chain. So once we establish a payment channel, a T-chan channel, we could move off the network entirely. So Morris and I could go to the middle of the desert, and we could go back and forth a gazillion times without access to anything. I know he cannot cheat me. He's on the other side of a T-chan connection, and I don't care at all about what happens on the blockchain. So that's quite different. No watchtowers, no anything else, no complications on that front. So we rewrote this code for Intel SGX. It's actually a lovely development environment, and we did a bunch of experiments. I actually wrote a bunch of this code. It's a lot of fun. If you haven't played with SGX, it's really worth taking a look at. And so I'll just show you some numbers. The numbers that we ended up getting are pretty darn high. So on a single channel, we were able to get on the order of 100,000 transactions per second. Okay? So So this is actually a slightly old number. We were getting 123,000 transactions per second as of the last time I checked. The latency to get into the enclave, so to go from my enclave to an encrypted message, and all the way to Itai's enclave, make a change and come back, is on the order of a fraction of a millisecond. And we were doing these experiments where payments from London to Ithaca were taking place in essentially the time it takes for the messages to go across the ocean, about 30 milliseconds plus 0.4. So the latencies are amazingly low, and the throughputs are incredibly high because, after all, this is supremely efficient. It's a trusted entity talking to another trusted entity at full speed. So let's see. There is no round trip. Actually, we were using TCP. So there is an acknowledgement going back at the TCP level, but all you're doing is generating one message with a number, with a sequence ID in it.
And you know that the other side receives it?
And you don't care if the other side receives it. You're doing a payment. So I give you $50. Well, I send it to you. And hopefully I'll get the goods back. And if I don't get the goods back, I can resend it to you. So, okay. So a couple of things, issues that you guys are going to think about is this whole issue about I don't want to trust Intel. It seems like Intel plays a pretty central role in all of this. That's true. So T-Chan is a protocol. So we're not necessarily trusting Intel. This is just our prototype that is based on Intel. But there are other hardware vendors that you could use. I think this one is the most exciting. This is Ledger. They manufacture devices that hold your bitcoins. If Ledger adopted this, we would be able to have ledger-to-ledger payments. They're a little slow to adopt these kinds of ideas, but that would be an amazing thing for them to do. They would be able to bypass all of that pesky blockchain stuff. Whoa, what happened? Yeah. Okay. So there are a couple of other things that I should mention. There are other hardware vendors. Trust is channel bound. Okay, so if I have a channel to Itai and he does some malfeasance, he screws around, he extracts the keys, the worst case scenario. Well, I know who cheated me. Okay, so at the end of the day, like my final line of defense is the fact that this is a person-to-person connection. Any kind of a cheat affects only that channel, not the global network. Yes?
And will you have proof of the cheat so that theoretically you could take it to court?
You will know. I think it's you can go to court at any time, right? So I live in the U.S. It's like,
but would you have a proof that you cheated that is valid?
Yes. You will have at least an attestation certificate that you got from the other side saying, "Hey, I'm running Intel secure chip." And if he then does something very bizarre, then you can say, look at these signed certificates. He must have been doing something funny. Absolutely.
You cannot deny it later.
It's non-deniable. That's correct. Yes.
You can have an Intel talk to an ARM, right?
To an ARM.
Bob could
Yes.
have Intel and Alice can have ARM.
Absolutely. And of course, keep in mind, it's like, well, aren't you introducing Intel as a trusted party? I should remind all of you that Intel is already a trusted party. When you issue a transaction, you issue the transaction, right? None of us go and check the modular exponentiation that your hardware did for you. None of us actually check the bytes in a Bitcoin transaction that our processor issues. People trust their hardware, so that trust is already there. Okay, so yeah, these guys have every incentive to keep their cash cow safe, even though they screwed up once. And people at the Technion were among the people who discovered how broken this was. This was the foreshadow attacks. Am I saying that right? Spectre and foreshadow, right? Applied to Intel SGX to extract keys from it. But they have fixed it with a dynamic patch, and the entire operation is pretty nicely run. The SDK is really beautiful. It's a nice programming environment. So, okay, so what did we then discuss? We talked about on-chain scaling of different kinds yesterday, and now we have a sense for how we might be able to use layer 2 networks to to get many, many, many more orders of magnitude, maybe 5 or more per channel. Okay, so and it of course will hopefully scale with the number of channels you have. Yeah.
Are the channels of the off-chain transactions, they're always defined as between two people? You can't have multi-party channels, or?
So that's an interesting question. The Ethereum folks have been worrying about this, and the Raiden network is trying to create channels between a small group of parties. So when you have a smart contract and a set of people who interact with it, so we're playing a board game, and there are the 5 of us, then you want to be able to take that smart contract off Ethereum into a sort of a different domain where we interact with the board game, and then we settle back on the main chain saying, Gun won the board game, he gets to collect all the money. So Raiden is trying to do exactly that.
Asymmetric cryptography means that there'll be exponential in the amount of participants.
I'm not.
The amount of messages that you need to pass.
I don't know that it will be exponential.
Or at least, like a high point it doesn't make sense to make a big group. But even if 5 people, it starts to be.
No, I think it's linear, really. I don't see that argument for why it should be worse than linear. But I'd have to think. If you insist on it, I'll have to go and think. So if it's just a bunch of us, we are running essentially crash-only devices. And
no, not for this. I mean, on
in Raiden in general, with Byzantine attackers, they might, yeah, indeed. So what has to happen when they go offline is they have to run a consensus protocol across those participants. Right, absolutely. Okay, so I think my voice is going. I'll take the last question. We'll take a short break maybe, and I'll change gears, yeah.
With chain and could be extended to not payment channel, to like the Lightning Network to extend. Is there not a gigantic incentive to actually hack the system and just be like propagate the risk to the other system, and that's what it makes next year. The thing is that with such a system, then you have trusted parties.
Yeah.
If you extend this to the peer-to-peer channel to like a full network, like the Lightning Network, then you can just, if you manage to compromise one chip, you compromise the entire system. Why people are not using? Okay, sorry, just.
So if you compromise one chip, you only compromise that payment channel. And the damage at the next hop is limited by the relationship that those two people have with regard to each other. I can cheat Itai and give him money I don't actually have if I have hacked my own SGX. Okay, so I'm making the big leap here. Let's assume SGX can be hacked. Okay, and it's going to be costly. But if that happens, I cheat Itai out of whatever is in the channel, and Itai gets to cheat Kevin out of whatever is in his channel with Kevin. But it's not like there's a limit to what one can do with this, right? So the damage is limited to my relationships with the rest of the world. Okay, let's maybe stop at that point, and we'll switch gears and talk about the DAO. I'll tell you the story of the DAO and what it means for decisions by collectives on the blockchain.
Let's do a 15-minute break.
15 minutes, okay.